Welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining us. Another high-ranking official in Washington has tested positive for COVID. Kamala Harris, the vice president, doesn't have any symptoms, and she's working from home.
The good news, although case numbers are up, they're still relatively low and with milder symptoms. Hospitalizations are at the lowest point since the pandemic began. Medical reporter Lori Johnson has the details.
Many public health experts recommend changing the way we measure the severity of COVID-19 surges. They say these days it makes a lot more sense to focus on how many people are being hospitalized for COVID instead of paying so much attention to how many people merely have it.
This discussion began in earnest following alarming media reports after a number of government officials tested positive, including 82-year-old Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was pictured kissing 77-year-old President Biden. Then information indicated the media blast was a bit overblown, as those infected had only mild or asymptomatic cases. Medical experts also pointed out that after 2 years of COVID, most Americans now enjoy some level of immunity from vaccination, past infection, or both.
Nancy Pelosi, for example, they're tested maybe even on a daily basis, and those tests are reported out.
EVMS public health expert Dr. Brian Martin says while reported cases are sharply increasing, the true number is likely much higher. The big takeaway? Today's infections are generally mild. Many may even mistake COVID for springtime allergies.
There's a lot of home test kits, so none of that gets reported. If you do a home test, you don't call your local health department and say, hey, I tested positive for COVID, so that they now have that case. There are also asymptomatic people in the community that are positive for COVID and don't know it.
While paying attention to rising case numbers made sense in the early days of the pandemic, focusing on infections alone can now be misleading, making the threat appear worse than it really is. For example, after cases shot up 50% in just 2 weeks, colleges from coast to coast brought back mask mandates, including American University in Washington, D.C.
I would say kind of a comforting feeling that they were back, but almost like too little too late since our cases had already spiked.
Hospitalizations, however, rose only 4% nationwide in the same time frame. Even the new White House COVID response coordinator says while the overall number of infections remains relevant, it's really the number of serious ones that more accurately reflects the true risk we face.
We should look at cases. It should be one of the factors. But we should also be looking at hospitalizations, obviously, because that matters more. And then we should be looking at hospital capacity.
Thankfully, hospitalizations are at the lowest level we've seen since the pandemic began. Medical experts have reason to believe the number will remain low because in addition to a higher level of immunity, new treatments are becoming more widely available, and vaccines are being developed to specifically target new variants. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Well, the great news is that hospitalizations are down, and what a wonderful story that is. We need to congratulate everyone in the healthcare industry, all of the nurses, all of the doctors, anyone involved, from the person at the front desk all the way to the person handling how do you launder all of these bed sheets. It's just amazing the sacrifices they all went through to give us health care, and it's a wonderful thing to hear that they're getting some relief. In other news, Russia is playing hardball with 2 European countries in the war with Ukraine. Ephraim Graham has that story from the CBN newsroom. Ephraim?
Gordon, Russia shut off natural gas to Poland and Bulgaria. Both are strong supporters of Ukraine. Poland's climate minister says the country has plenty of natural gas in reserve. Russia's move comes one day after the United States and other Western allies promised to quickly send more and better military supplies to Ukraine. Russian forces are keeping up their attacks amid fears the war could spill over Ukraine's borders. President Biden said to wait a month to see if sanctions were working. The war has already lasted much longer, and some experts say Russia's continued assaults are proof sanctions have not slowed Putin's war machine. Caitlin Burke has that story.
The Biden administration's approach to sanctions remains a gradual one. And while it successfully brought together a number of other countries to put economic pressure on Russia, analysts warn it's not deterring Putin's pursuit of Ukraine.
When the Biden administration announced sanctions on the 24th of February, they specifically said, in fact, the president himself tweeted that their goal was to reduce the ruble to rubble. Unfortunately, as we've seen today, with the ruble trading at higher levels against the dollar than before the attack, by their own metric, the Biden administration has failed.
Marshall Billingsley, former Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing at the Treasury Department, says instead of dealing a crushing blow to Russia's economy, the Biden administration has deferred to European countries that rely on Russian oil and gas.
They'd rather see the price of their heating bills in their homes be lower than to take the shorter-term economic pain to cause Putin's war machine to melt down financially.
Billingsley believes what's needed is the playbook used against Iran and Venezuela during the Trump administration. Full sanctions on the energy sector, accompanied by secondary sanctions against any country continuing to do business with Russia. Also, similar action against other valuable exports like metals and minerals. Plus, full sanctions against the entire Russian financial sector.
Why are we pulling our punches? What is the moral compass at work here? Given what we're seeing, I don't see it, and I find the refusal to fully sanction the Russian economy into the ground the way they are physically doing to the Ukrainian people. I find it morally unconscionable that we're not doing more and faster and better.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is pushing the Biden administration to trigger some of the toughest sanctions under U.S. law by designating Russia a state sponsor of terror.
There are only a handful of countries that have been designated as state sponsors of terrorism, and Russia belongs in that camp.
But would that designation and its consequences have any impact?
I don't believe Putin is in the habit of receiving messages at this stage. The key is perhaps not messaging to him, it's messaging to those around him. That unless and until the war stops in Ukraine, and perhaps unless and until Vladimir Putin is gone, the sanctions pressure will continue to grow, and Russia will be reduced back to its Soviet-era breadlines.
As fighting in Ukraine again escalates, the Biden administration says it's committed to raising pressure on Russia. Many observers are asking, however, will it be enough? Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
As Ukrainians flee the warfare at home, CBN's Orphans Promise is providing them with food from a unique farming project. Take a look.
Our Farm to School project here in Khust, Ukraine, is teaching the Roma children not just to all the life skills that they will need to succeed in their lives, but also how to feed themselves. So through our seed program, Something to Eat Every Day, we're about to plant this plot of land where they are going to be getting the food to their own tables, but also they're collecting eggs here with the quail and chickens. And they not only help with getting the food towards their own tables, but they also are helping the refugees right now that are coming from the east. And so the eggs collected today, and really every day, part of them go to help the refugee families fleeing from the war.
Бачиш, вчора вилупилися. Не вискочило, бачиш. Що вони ці побили? Видно, встали. Для себе, правильно?
A unique way to lend a hand. Gordon?
Very unique way, and that's part of the signature of Orphans Promise. How do we help people? Helping people in very tangible ways. If I can get the map of Orphan Promise centers, you can see how that's being replicated across Ukraine. Orphans Promise working in Ukraine now for over 20 years, and this war isn't stopping our work. We want to continue to help people have the ability to feed themselves, as well as to provide for the refugees the food and water, the shelter, the direction that they need. If you want to be a part of it, all you have to do is give to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. It's real easy. Pick up the phone and call 1-800-700-7000, or you can write to us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23463. Just put Disaster Relief Fund in the memo line of a check. You can text us, OB Crisis, to 71777, or go to cbn.com. Either way, do it now.